Your NetSuite, the developer should report into you, and you should control that system fully. That's your accounting source of truth. Deal Hub, a bit more of a stretch there on the CPQ side, but since I also oversee sales comp, it made a lot of sense. But I think, all controllers should be making that request. And you probably have somewhere, you have an engineer, right? That's probably a central resource or maybe helping another team. You should be trying to get their time, but you have to come prepared with what you actually need them to do.
From Numeric, this is Incoming Statements, the podcast built for forward-thinking accounting pros. Join Anthony Alvarez, Numeric's co-founder and chief product officer, as he talks with accounting leaders about what practices and philosophies are defining modern financial operations. So grab your coffee, throw on some headphones, and let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Incoming Statements. I'm your host, Anthony Alvarez. I am your guest host, Eli Geschwind. And this episode is brought to you by Numeric, AI-powered close and reporting automation for leading accounting teams. Today, our guest is Thomas Neel, controller at Celigo. Celigo is a leading infrastructure platform as a service, or iPaaS, that connects cloud and on-premise apps to automate workflows and deliver real-time insights. We had a wide-ranging conversation touching on his time in the UK and China setting up shared service centers, to how he uses data as a controller to drive revenue. So Nigel, I am the guest host and I'm slated to do a few more. Hopefully this interview with Thomas was good enough to clear the bar for unleashing me on some other guests. And I'm curious how you as the producer think about this role of the guest host and rotating some other Numericans into the slot.
Yeah, thanks, Eli. Nigel here, content manager at Numeric, who also serves as producer for Incoming Statements podcast. Eli, we really tried to up the volume of episodes we're putting out for Incoming Statements for people to be able to listen to. We have so many guests we'd like to feature. Anthony's one man. We love him dearly. But we said, hey, why don't we go America's Got Talent style with this and really start to spread the hosting opportunity to people across our offices. And so we'll have more guest hosts like yourself going forward. Anthony will still be hosting a number of episodes as well, but we're really excited to start spreading the wealth around.
So our episode with Thomas, I thought was fantastic. Both he and our CEO, Parker Gilbert, have two first names. Is that a coincidence?
I actually think it is. Thanks for mentioning that. But perhaps it's not. Perhaps Thomas was supposed to walk into our arms all along. I will say that Thomas's last name, Neel, is N-E-E-L as opposed to N-E-A-L.
That is a very good point. Nigel, do you agree with Thomas's take that in the next few years, we almost certainly will not see a one-person accounting team for a $1 billion plus company?
I do personally. I think based on our work here in Numeric, trying to make workflows as efficient as possible, it just seems highly unlikely that you can reduce all friction necessary. And so as a result, I think that managing all the financials for one person is an incredibly difficult endeavor, and it remains to be seen if that'll be able to happen.
I think in 2 years, there's going to be a certain flavor of company that maybe with a couple outsourced folks, one real core accountant, we could see something like that. But do agree that there is so much systems, process, data analysis that is so integral to how companies grow, retain their customers, and track revenue that the sheer volume will make it incredibly difficult to do so. Besides the fact that people like to take vacations or have kids. And so you need probably more than one person just to be able to manage all of your agent army or whatever it might be, since people like to go to sleep and do fun things outside of work.
100%. All right, Eli, without further ado, should we hop into the episode?
Let's do it, Nigel. Thomas, great to have you on. You've said that you see accounting as more than closing the books. You see it as a revenue driver. And I'm curious, where does that mindset come from?
I think a lot of that mindset, actually comes from my experience and how I got into a controller role. I think a lot of controllers kind of come the same path, which is Big Four accounting. You stay there a long time. Your specialty is technical accounting and financial statements. And then when you move into industry, that's your strong suit and you kind of stay there. For my career, I took a little bit of a different path. While I started in Big Four accounting, I didn't stay very long. I stayed till about my second senior year, so about 5 years total. And then I moved into a technical accounting role. That's kind of where I started as well. But then I started seeing different opportunities open up. And I kept taking those opportunities, and those opportunities led to me understanding a lot more about the operations side and the processes and the systems that we all rely on in accounting. And because of that, I have a larger view, I think, of what accounting can be. And in the end, why I think accounting, and specifically in the controllership organization, can be a great revenue driver and great tool for analytics for the company, is just because of the breadth of what we get to see. There's nothing that I don't see, right? Whether that's payroll, whether that's sales comp, whether that's vendor spend, whether that's AR, customer behaviors, I can see all of that. And so being able to have the time and build a strong enough team to be able to have the time to do that, to be able to analyze that and listen to the executives talk about what the strategies are for the company, and making sure that those strategies are actually happening real time by looking at all the data that I have access to, allows me to have a lot of insight that I don't think many other departments can possibly have, because they can't see that full of a picture. They, I wouldn't say are siloed, but at least in the data they have available to them, just because of segregation of duties and controls, they do have a data silo for a lot of stuff that only someone in a finance position is able to see. And if you can leverage that information properly, you can come up with a lot of great strategic drivers and changes that you can work with your executive teams to be able to unlock new revenue streams or maximize the revenue streams that your company currently has.
Speaking about data, a lot of it, as you mentioned, is a bit of a treasure trove. What do most people miss when they are looking at this data, assuming they do have access to some of it?
The biggest mistake is you're just kind of reconciling the data, right? Of course, a core of any controller and any controllership organization is the accuracy of the data. So that has to be there, right? And so you're focusing on reconciliation, being accurate, tying up your subledgers to your general ledgers. If you have a real good accounting team, they are at least diving into why is this balance what it is? Does it make sense? But then taking that even the one step further, does this match the strategic objectives that the company is aiming for and we're hearing about, right? If I'm hearing about a bunch of changes coming from the executives and then I'm looking at the data, I want to take the time to make sure that that data is agreeing to that. At any company, it's big data, right? So it's difficult to be able to get a hold of all of that data and to be able to look at it in a meaningful way, which is somewhere that I think AI is coming in to play a lot and can help with a lot of that data analysis when you set up the right models.
And tactically, when you are analyzing the data and trying to work with other teams as you uncover insights around the data, talk to me tactically around how you're either setting up those meetings or surfacing any of the insights that you're happening upon.
When I think about stepping into the role as a controller, one of the most important things to do that takes time is building that cross-functional trust, specifically with sales, a partner success team, if you have them, with the product team, and being as useful as possible. I've been very lucky. We have a great executive team here. So anytime they've come to me needing help with something, I'm always the first one to help. And I put my team out there. I have a pretty large organization. And so I have a lot of manpower to help people with problems. Focusing on that first and building that foundational trust then really leads to all of those teams coming back to me and relying on me, right? And needing the data that I have. And so if you have executives who are good, they'll come to you with a lot of the questions and the answers are hidden somewhere in that data. So making sure that they know that you're the right person to come to, that they trust you, and that you will be able to give them that analysis that they're looking for, figuring out what the data is really saying and being open-minded about what the data is saying. One example I can give is when I see all order management, because I have teams under me as well, and I also have a renewal specialist team under me that focuses on renewals. And so I have a lot of approvals that come to me in Deal Hub's our CPQ, but in our CPQ that come to me for approval. And one of the parameters that I have set is essentially deals that get sold that have no increase. As all high-tech companies are, we're pouring money into R&D, right? And so it's natural to have at least a year-over-year increase because all the new functionality that we're delivering to our customers. And seeing a lot of deals that don't have that, and then that's the first kind of flag. No one asked me about it, but just seeing it and then digging more into those details and being like, why are we having so many things come through like this? And what the answer is that the way we'd set up the data in our system, or really the parameters in our system originally from a pricing perspective, you had like a hard cap at what we would consider the list price, even though the list price has changed over the years. So you had all these legacy customers that were sitting at a price that you could not go above, even though they've been at that price for 3-5 years. We have spent $100 million in R&D, increasing our product, introducing AI, making it better, charging new customers more than that. So seeing that and realizing just putting those 2 points together, we have a price increase strategy. I think all companies do, but we're not able to do it to this customer base. And then looking at that customer base and realizing that it represents a pretty large amount of our customers. So then proactively bringing that forward to the sales teams, to the executives, showing what I found and showing that, hey, look, there's this really big upside here that we're just missing on. And of course, getting cross-functional executive agreement on the strategy of what to do there. And then I'll say it simply, but it was very complex, but reconfiguring the quoting, the invoicing, the system data, standalone selling price, fair values, had to adjust all of that to make it work, but unlocking the ability to now increase any price, no matter where it's at, no matter if it used to be list price, if it's a new list price, so that we have that ability. And that led to a very material increase in revenue, almost like a new revenue stream. And so, that being able to see that and understand that and connect the points, no one else could. Everyone else saw the approvals, but they didn't have the ability to go and look at all the contracts and why that was. Maybe someone started to ask the question, but they couldn't run it all the way to the end. But having that cross-functional foundation with all the other executive leaders and being able to surface this and get the champions that I needed on the project, and then being able to drive it to closure is just a great example of something that I don't think other organizations could have seen that full picture in order to drive it there.
It sounds like it was both a people and a process problem. How did you decide which to tackle first or whether to tackle them in parallel?
I think first is always the people, and going out, once again, getting the executive buy-in for that change, right? Anything that impacts customers, you have to be obviously extremely careful about. So getting the buy-in from the product team, getting the buy-in from the sales team, getting the buy-in from the legal team of what that would have to look like, and having those high-level conversations. And it took a while, but I had some other leaders who understood it and were really in line with it, especially on the sales side. So leveraging their voice in those executive meetings to make sure that we could get the full buy-in. That really was number one. At the same time, I started doing the investigation, more of my teams started doing the investigation of what that looked like from the system side, because it crosses all systems. And I'm lucky that here at Celigo, I do own, I guess what we call our business systems, but that's really NetSuite, and that is our CPQ. But our CRM, Salesforce, sits in the middle, and that's a whole different team. So also not only just from the strategic buy-in, getting the buy-in from that team in order to put that project high enough that we could get it done in a timely manner. So I think you have to really tackle both at the same time. But of course, the buy-in from the people, I think, is the most important. Motivating my team and the cross-functional teams that are working on it about what this outcome could look like, and then celebrating when you get that outcome, which is what happened, right? There's a thesis of, hey, if we do this, it could unlock revenue. And it's very rare in G&A that you get to be a revenue driver. I've heard all my career, you're just a cost center, right? So that's a very unique opportunity, and that's very motivating to the team. And then once it came to fruition over a quarter, it showed up prominently in the QBR, in our quarterly business review, enough to where the team got a nice shout out at the all hands meeting, which is super motivational to have that happen in front of the whole company.
Where did this mindset shift happen? In Big Four, you are learning a lot about technical accounting, not necessarily cross-functional leadership, understanding how to implement change across teams in a large organization. So curious where you learn this and how you've then been able to adopt it so successfully.
Big Four is such a great experience. And I think a lot of accountants strive to have that Big Four experience. And it is great. And it's such a great foundation for just the core technical aspect of accounting. So I look very fondly, not so much at the hours worked, but very fondly at my experience in the Big Four. I got lucky that coming out of the Big Four, like I said, I took a technical accounting role. I'd always been pretty system savvy, or at least automation minded. And I took a role at a public company, a small public company, and was there the technical accountant, audit liaison, writing memos, goodwill impairment, restructuring, that kind of stuff, the more technical aspects of their accounting. And it was funny because I remember my first week there and had 1 week of training with the person that I was essentially replacing that was leaving the company. And I just sat there like, wow, this is what you do all month. Like you can automate like 90% of this just with basic VBA and Excel macros. And so I was excited. That has always been my mindset of like really the automation side of it. And people see that. And then the next really big experience that I had was at that same public company where they were opening a shared service center. And everyone's scared, right? Hey, we're back office. You're opening this to replace all of us. And I just saw more of an opportunity. One, it was going to be in China. I've never been to China. That sounded like a fun trip. And it started out small as, hey, I'll go help train these people. And it was in AR and AP was the two things we were moving first. And I've never worked in AR and AP. And so to be able to train them, I had to go train myself. And so I worked long hours to get that cross-functional training with the teams. That expanded into a management opportunity at the shared service center itself. And so I actually moved to Shenzhen, China, and started managing that shared service center. Long story short, after about a year, I ran the entire thing. I had about 63 people there. We had AR, AP, intercompany, revenue, payroll, fixed assets, and general ledger all under my team. And that was an amazing experience to take essentially we had 37 entities. And so to take the processes, and we had like essentially 3 hubs that were doing most of the accounting, but to take all those processes and try to make them all to one. Because what we found out very quickly, the way they did AR in North America is not the same as they did it in Germany, which is not the same as they did it in Singapore. Even though they're the same system, and some of them weren't the same system, there were little nuances and difference to each one. Some had to be that way for statutory reasons. But that was an amazing experience to get that deep into essentially all of the accounting functions and then to try to transition them and then streamline them and automate as much as we could, but it was extremely successful. Like I said, we started out with 63 headcount when we were just doing all the transitions to get it there. And then just through process efficiency gains, we were able to get down to just 50. So we drastically were able to reduce the headcount just by streamlining those processes. I was on a little bit of an island, to be honest, in a good way. And it really pushed me to try to see that. And as I had those successes, our CFO really took note of it. And he was a CFO that came from like a sales route. And so it's a little bit of a different CFO route than your normal like controller CPA type CFO. And it was very, very helpful. And there's a while that I reported to him when we were having some changes there. And that opened my eyes a lot about the strategy side because he wasn't a technical accountant. He's not over there talking about ASC 606 or something, right? He's thinking more of it all from the strategy and what can we do from the costs aspect of it and how can we reform the shared service center to be more helpful and to take even more processes over. And that was my first opportunity to really see that strategic side of it and have a seat at the table at board meetings and at executive level meetings. That definitely is where it started. And then after that, I came to my first startup, and that was an eye-opening experience. The old public company was very large, had been there for so long, and people had been there for 30, 40 years. And it's very hard to convince them to change things when they've been there for 30, 40 years. So then coming to a startup where essentially you're building the planes you're flying in, I found really fit my personality and my approach that I wanted to have to business. And that gave me the opportunity to start being that voice of trying to make sure. And one thing that I think, once again, just tying it back to the data is the data. And you can analyze it in different ways, but like it should tell a pretty clear story. And so being able to have that data and being able to do those kind of analysis, there's a lot of times when there's cloudy decisions in a startup and people have a lot of different opinions. Trying to be that internal voice of clarity with data-driven findings and suggestions, I think has always really helped me throughout my career to be able to move to that more strategic role. And then here at Celigo, I've been extremely lucky that I have a great CFO who really believes in me and has given me a seat at the table at all those executive level decisions and meetings and really pushes me to talk, right? To show my viewpoint. I remember my first 6 months here, and I think this is pretty normal. I hid a little bit in the background as I just gained that base knowledge of everything I needed to know about my team and about my process and about the data that we had here. And it was our second QBR where I'm sitting in the meeting and I'm not saying much. I'm still getting my feet wet. And he's slacking me. You need to speak up. You know this. This is your area. Speak up and say something. And that having that champion there really helped me take that next step and being that confident and knowing that, yeah, he's right. Like I do have this data. I do know the ins and outs of everything that we're talking about. Let me share that with everyone to make sure that I'm bringing clarity when there's not so much confusion, but differing opinions about what the next step should be.
Few questions emerging from that. When you have folks join your team, do you like when they start in the shallow end and slowly walk down the steps? Or do you encourage and like when folks jump straight into the deep end?
It's a great question. And every person's different, but my expectation is always the same. And it's my expectation of myself as well, is whatever you're doing, you need to be able to understand every aspect of it from the bottom up, right? And so I like people to start slow because I don't want to overwhelm them, but I want them to be so deep in that small piece of the process that they're starting that they understand it inside and out. And I also expect people to take the one thing I hate when I work with, and no one on my team's ever done this to me, but when I have new executives come in, the first thing they do is be like, this is how I've seen it work before. So boom, we're doing this right now. And every company's different. So you got to understand fully what the process is, what the problems are, listen to the team, get all that feedback before you just start trying to jump and make drastic changes. So on my own team, that's what I like. I like to give people small pieces of what their role is going to be. And then I want them to master that small piece. And then we slowly scale it up to see how far they can get. I never want anyone to say to me, why'd you do this? That's because it's always been that way. That's just how I was taught to do it. No, like you need to understand exactly why you do each step. And then I want to challenge people to say, all right, now how do we automate this? My goal always for myself, for my entire team is I don't want anyone doing transactional level work. I want to automate away all the transactional level work. I want my team to essentially be accountants, but data scientists, where they are looking at big data sets and they can find the anomalies. And then that's what unlocks scalability, right? One thing I always keep an eye on is what is my organization's cost as a percentage of revenue. And as we grow 2x, 3x, I don't want that cost to grow 2x, 3x, right? I want that to stay pretty consistent because that you have all the automation in place. And that's a lot to do, but that's one of the reasons why I do like startups is because a lot of that is being built when you join the company and you have new systems, new technologies, all those things that are coming out, and they're more likely to be able to adopt that. Part of the reason why I chose Celigo when I started is because we're an automation company. And so I also have a massive team of engineers that can help me with AI automations, writing code for me, developing our own product to be more use cases for finance that we then go around and turn and sell to customers. I think everyone should start. I don't know if I consider that the shallow end or the deep end, right? Start a little bit slow and just fully understand the process before you try to make drastic changes. And as a boss, I think it's very important to set people up for success of just not giving them too much at once. And I think if you give someone everything all at once, then they don't have the time to think about what the improvements could be. Another thing I do with my teams is, which kind of comes back to a Scrum Agile methodology, is always having reviews of the processes, monthly reviews, quarterly reviews, but of the actual process level of, hey, what's going right? What's not going right? Let's talk about the issues that are coming up in these processes. And that's one thing I like, especially about GL, is it does have peaks and valleys as far as workloads go, and making sure that in those valleys, that's the time that you know your team, hey, focus on the improvements, right? Let's every month, every quarter, let's pick out one big improvement that you see in your process, and let's make sure we target it during those downtimes to be able to have the time to make those improvements and just constant innovation, right? I think it's Kaizen is the term of like, even a tiny improvement, right, of 0.1% every day is astronomical when you look at it over a year.
What are some of the improvements you've recently made during the valleys?
So we've been in such an implementation mode recently, but I think all those also are improvements, but unfortunately it hasn't quite been in the valleys because they've been drastic. But like one of our big things, a big accomplishment we made recently was getting off of an external provider for all of our international reporting and international accounting. I don't have anything against external providers, and there's a lot of times when it makes sense, especially early on. But once you're mature enough as a company, having all of that in-house just unlocks so many synergies in the team. It was a lot of back and forth trying to get them the data they needed, and they're running it in their own system. So getting everything into our single ERP, so we have a source of truth, which is NetSuite, and then getting off the external provider and bringing in-house resource that does all of that accounting allowed us to accelerate the closing of our books by a lot and saved us all a lot of time because now we have someone in that is the expert, knows all that data inside and out, and we're not having a liaison between the outside provider when we have questions or when there's statutory reporting issues that pop up every once in a while.
On the operational side, how did you decide that it was time to bring something in-house? And what heuristics or guidelines should other folks in similar situations think about when deciding to bring certain parties in-house?
I mean, for me, it was a pretty easy decision. And I think my experience in shared services, right? As I mentioned, I moved to China, ran a shared service center. I also opened a second shared service center for that same company in Pune, India. And I'm very, very comfortable with the shared services, and I'm very comfortable with the talent that's there. And so we had a large engineering team for Celigo based out of Hyderabad. Not much else was there, but I saw that as a great opportunity, right? And so a lot of times when I hire and I backfill and I expand the team, I am hiring those people in Hyderabad, which is, a lower cost location sitting here in San Francisco Bay. And so for me, it was a very easy calculation of we paid a lot of money to these providers and it was a lot of time, not wasted, but a lot of time spent on getting their information and keeping it ready. The other thing is when I joined Celigo, we were going through our first Big Four audit and we were 3 years behind. And a big reason why we were 3 years behind on that was because the data was coming from all those different systems. And so when you're moving to your Big Four audit, when you're really ramping up for the IPO type environment and trying to put those controls in place, in my opinion, it's very difficult to have major parts of your accounting outsourced. And so that's like a very key time that, hey, it makes sense to bring it in-house. And even if it wasn't going to be able to be done at a low cost location and it's one of my senior accountants sitting here in the US, it's still worth it for me, especially to be able to have the better clarity into those numbers and have someone here on my team that I can ask that's accountable for them. My biggest issue with outsourced providers is normally that accountability is not there. And also that you're usually a rotating team, right? And so you don't have someone with a historical knowledge and you're always getting new teammates from that outsourced provider on your team. The pivot point. Once you have an established accounting team and hopefully a good accounting leader, as in a good GL accounting leader that you can trust to take on that extra work, then it really makes sense to get everything into one system and to bring it all in-house.
Based on your experience setting up shared service centers, for folks who don't already have resources internationally or in Hyderabad like Celigo, how do you recommend they initially get started so that they can set themselves up on the path to internalize what they may be using an external provider for today?
One of the beauties in today's environment, obviously, is how amazing remote work is, right? We have so many tools that have come out that make remote work very possible. And so then there's a lot of companies out there where you can have your employer of records, EORs. And so I think any company has access to international talent at any time that they want. And I think that is the first step, is you use the EOR model. You have plenty of people who are very happy to work from home and don't need an office. In fact, we have a beautiful office in Hyderabad. 90% of my team doesn't go into the office, right? Because they work US hours with me, or at least extended hours, and no one else is in the office at that time anyways, and they prefer to work from home. So I think that you can always start building the outsource model, really at any time that you want in today's day and age, which is much, much different than it used to be. And I think depending on what your company does, right? Usually someone is going to probably start a hub somewhere internationally. That's one of the hardest parts, is deciding where that it should be. When I started both my shared service centers, I didn't choose the first location, which was Shenzhen, China. I got involved after they'd already chosen that location. We chose that location because we had a very big contract manufacturer team there. We had an office and we had space. It made sense. But after being there for about a year and a half, Shenzhen is just an amazing city, but an amazingly fast growing city full of talent and full of competition for that talent. And we were having trouble getting the talent that we wanted at the price point that we were willing to pay because the competition was so high. So we had a second IT center that was based out of Pune, India. Same story, had extra space. We already had the office there. And so that's where we opened the second shared service center and had better access to talent, and also was able to get international language talent, which was amazing. So we had Spanish, French, and German speakers that could deal directly with our local entities in those regions and also with our customers in those regions. It's open to anyone nowadays, and you can just start building, and that's how you start, right? You start onesies, twosies, but you need to be consistent, at least in the location that you're choosing. Another place that we have team members that we actually do all through EOR. We have an entity in India, so those are all full-time employees. But for the EOR model, I hire a lot of people in the Philippines too. And my team there's not as big. It's about 5. I'm interviewing 2 more headcount right now, so we'll probably build it up to about 7. But that's another great location where you can find a lot of talent and you can find people with a lot of the experience that you need. So rather than, if you have the time as a controller, as a manager to be able to oversee their work, I honestly think you'll find that you save time by outsourcing your own team members that you control versus going through the service providers.
And when do you decide between adding more headcount overseas versus trying to automate certain processes with new software systems?
It's a great question. And it's always a very difficult question because You have access to lower cost headcount, and there's always like this curve where it's here's the expense of your headcount versus the expense of the system. And at some point they're going to cross. And so you have to keep that in mind, right? And you have to think long term. I would always prefer to implement new systems and automations rather than expanding headcount. Unfortunately, it's not possible, right? You just can't be that far ahead. And so it is always a decision, but I think back to just the constant improvement for my ops team, especially my ops and my systems teams, right? We run 2-week sprints. We have a lot of user stories. We have a lot of deliverables that come out of those. And we are just constantly innovating and upgrading our systems to get there, which is helping us not need to do that expansion in headcount. But a lot of it depends on how fast the company is growing, right? At some points, you just can't automate fast enough to keep up. One of the very fun parts of startup, I think, as we all know, is you change courses a lot and you have to be very agile. And sometimes when you change courses like that, it breaks a lot of the automations you have. And when that's the strategic right decision, I can't go to my CEO and be like, no, we can't do that because it breaks my automations and now I need more headcount. It takes up too much time for my team. I would never say that. And so you do have to make sure you're staffed enough to be able to handle that, because changes do break automations, right? And new systems, new implementations break a lot of automations you have. So you have to make sure you have a team that's big enough to handle that. If you had infinite budget, which no one ever does, right? There are amazing systems out there nowadays that you can implement that can really head off a lot of the headcount hiring. But in the short term, I think, you end up adding headcount. And my goal is always to try to stay just a little bit ahead of the curve to where I'm automating enough that my team has some capacity. And then I'm very quick to see, hey, if we're having turnover somewhere or if we're having issues in processes somewhere, I'm always very quick to raise my hand and be like, let my team do it, right? When something comes up, we get to take on new stuff, I think, which is always exciting, but it's difficult to do. And when you're growing really, really fast, sometimes you just have to add headcount. But for sure, automation should always come first. The big caveat there is you don't automate bad processes. And so it takes a while to get processes in a good enough place where it makes sense to automate them. And you're not having 1,000 exceptions thrown out of the automation, right? Because that happy path has to be the majority of what's going through, or else the automation's not going to work. Like I said, my first 6 months here was understanding those processes, seeing where the issues were, and getting as many things on the happy path as we could. So that way that automations could actually work and take hold. That's also always a very difficult part of a controller's job, because there's always a balance. The easiest way to make a process work perfect is just to not allow exceptions. Especially in startups, you can't be that stringent. And there's always going to be exceptions. You always have to make room for them. And then it's just making sure that you have the appropriate controls around those exceptions and that you don't let it get out of control, right? Because it can add up a lot and it can take a lot of manpower if you just have exceptions all over the place.
Are there any processes that come to mind that you may have automated too early? And in looking at those, besides the fact that you don't want to automate bad processes, are there any other learnings that you take away from those experiences?
I think the biggest mistakes that I've ever made in process automation is not defining what the expectations are upfront and very explicitly. So when I worked in my public company, when I was still managing the shared service centers, I started an automation program, and it started with me and a free robotic process automation bot that I used to automate our month-end close, just to show what it could do. And then so I was very bootstrapped. I ended up with a budget of $10,000 to get some actual bots that we could use in production in-house. And I learned a lot the hard way through that process. See, it's already a good process, but you're not clear on what the to-be process needs to be. And you start working on something that you're not as familiar with. I think a lot of times with automations, I'm focusing on GTM type processes because I'm trying to save our sellers time, right? I want our sellers to be selling and to be driving revenue. I don't want them doing data entry and spending too much time in the system. So when you start to automate things within those areas, a lot of times what ends up happening, especially if you have engineers that are helping with the automation as well, they hear one thing and then they go spend weeks automating it. And then they now have the readout. You think you're done. And there's this whole list of like, no, that's not what I meant. That's not how it's run. That doesn't work. It has to be this. And so you have to be very, very clear on what are the parameters and what are the exact deliverables, what is in scope and what is out of scope. It is a pain, but documentation is key when it comes to any automations and making sure that you have that. And for example, here at Celigo, we're going through AI transformation all across the company right now. And that's one of the things that we're running into, right? One of the core tenets of that program is be fast, right? Get these done. But the problem is if you skip those steps on documentation, then you end up in this constant iteration battle where you just, one project that should have only taken like a month if you were really clear on what the deliverable was, ends up taking 6 months because they just keep changing little things and changing the goal line on you. Once your own processes you're automating, hopefully it's a little bit easier because you should know them inside and out and you know what those deliverables are. And then it's just making sure that you're working with whatever team's actually building the automations to make that very clear. For example, here at Celigo, where we have an automation team that I give stuff to, right? Like they have documentation that they ask us to give them and they have their own prioritization and all of that. And I sit on that steer co, but I go further than that, right? I make my team, hey, team, you want this automated? Go make a recording, go make a standard operating procedure, every single step, walk through it, talk through it, document it. And then we have successful automations because of that. And if we just gave them a high level and let them work, then I think you get up with a lot of confusion and a lot of back and forth.
On the AI front, Sam Altman recently suggested that with tools like GPT-5, the first billion-dollar one-person company could emerge in the next few years. And I'm curious from your perspective, can a billion-dollar company have one accountant in the next couple of years?
Not the next couple of years. I think AI is amazing. I'm fully bought in. I have a lot of use cases that I use it for, though I have to admit, I don't think I'm fast enough in adopting it. And even just trying to figure out how to adopt it and where it is, I honestly find it hard to find really good information on exactly what AI can do in the accounting space from an AI specific standpoint. But I do feel like the sky's the limit. And I do feel like it can get there. But it goes back to what I've always wanted all my teams to do, even before AI was there. Look, I want my teams to be data scientists. So I do see a world where AI and different types of automation, just really, it's more than AI, but where all the transactional stuff can be automated. But you still, in my opinion, need someone to go through the data and be able to flag. And actually, I think AI can flag the discrepancies, but then to go and investigate those discrepancies. I don't think we're close to a place where AI could actually give me a report that I felt comfortable as far as, like, hey, here's all the outliers and here's why they're outliers. I think it can get to where, hey, here's all the outliers, but once again, someone has to feed it. What is an outlier? Why is it an outlier? And then when you see an outlier, what do you do to investigate? I just feel like we're so far from that being the reality in the current state, but I do think it gets there. I do think there is a world where, AI is out there and it's probably built into the systems we use, probably into the ERPs itself, but like AI is out there doing all your accounting and all your transactions, all of your recons, and everything's prepared all the way through financial statements, right? And you do have one accountant that's there overseeing it. And what I struggle with the most there, I've been thinking about a lot as far as if I was going to go back and start my career today, would I choose accounting? Because you hear all this, AI is going to take accounting jobs away. And you hear reports of people being told to take their CPA off their email signatures and stuff, some crazy stuff out there. But how can someone get to that position where they're skilled enough to be able to review all that data if they don't go through all the steps that we all have to get to that position? And so that's where I think the conundrum is. If you're outsourcing lower level jobs and then you're now using AI to get those jobs, who is reviewing the work of AI? How do you get someone that has that skill set? Because I have a CPA. I went to college for accounting, obviously. I have a master's degree. I don't use any of that stuff in my day-to-day work. It is learning on the job, and it's so different when you actually get into the field. And if you don't have people that have gone through all that and all those different levels, I don't see how you could have one person that's skilled enough to review what AI is doing.
You mentioned on your team, you have a lot of data scientists, or you want them to almost act like data scientists. And at Numeric, we certainly have a few other customers as well who think the same way. They're SQL wizards, they know Python. As you are recruiting and thinking about building out this team, how much of it do you have to teach them on the job? And how do you think about setting the foundation so that they feel comfortable analyzing and manipulating the data?
I don't hire true data scientists. I train people to be the data scientists because the first thing I want is a in-depth knowledge of the process that they're overseeing, right? And I feel like that's what's really going to be able to make them able to analyze that data in a meaningful way. And so I'm always recruiting and looking for people with the actual accounting or, for example, order management experience, RevOps experience, sales compensation experience. And then once again, it's Celigo. I'm lucky because we're an automation company. So we have a lot of that talent as far as engineers, developers that we have access to. And I'm constantly trying to partner my high performers with people on those teams to learn, right? And say, go work with this person, or this person's our Snowflake SQL expert. Go work with him. And then talking to him, be like, can you take this person under your wing a little bit? Show them what you do. I don't just want you giving them reports. I want them to be able to fish. And so having that mindset of and finding that employee. So that's really the mindset that I'm looking for, is someone who wants to take that next step. I think the key to success in my career and to any finance person's career really is the ability to leverage data and the tools needed to analyze it, whether that's systems or whether that's actually coding in its own right. Understanding that is huge. I think one of my specialties is system implementations. And I'm one of the rare people that'll tell you, like, I love system implementations. It's one of the most fun things. You learn so much when you do a system implementation. It's hard, but it's rewarding.
What mindset shift do you think will get more folks to like system implementations?
So I worked as the PMO project management office for finance at my public company. And I worked with some excellent project managers and learned so much. And I think that project management's the key. And I think that I think accountants that really want to go far in the field need to take the time to either take program management courses, or at least work with really good program managers you have access to at your company and steal best practices, right? And learn those best practices. One of the things like I recently did was a Scrum Master training, right? Because I run a Scrum Agile process. I read books about it. I don't know. I wasn't an expert, and learned so much. And we were able to really increase the efficiency of what we're doing by getting that kind of training. But I think that's the system implementation issue, is that one, you don't have good program management of project management of what's actually going on and keeping track of it. And then two, the really difficult part is the cross collaboration piece, right? It goes back to that cross-functional trust of making sure that your boss, you have to have everyone fully bought in, and you have to have someone with authority who's willing to speak up and force people to do things that aren't getting done. I think that's the most frustrating part about system implementations, is that you're usually cross-functional teams. You have to rely on other teams. It's probably not their number one priority, even though it is yours. And so being able to speak up and being able to have that influence and persuasion to get things over the finish line.
What is something that you can do because you have engineers that work with you on the accounting side that if you didn't have them wouldn't be able to get done? And maybe as a follow-up, how can other accounting teams advocate to get some sort of technical resources or evaluate whether or not they need technical resources embedded within their team?
The biggest one's the AI program, right? If I didn't have someone that was a specialist engineer in AI, we wouldn't be able to kick off all of our AI initiatives. For myself, right, we have ChatGPT licenses. So yeah, hey, I can create GPTs, and I have created several of them. I can launch them and use them to deal with inquiries that come, or at least for training and onboarding my employees. I can do that. But actual getting AI into the system itself and stitching together all the different components of that to make that happen, like, I can never get there without having a dedicated engineer. Granted, it's a shared resource. But the other part is that I do have developers for both my main systems, like I said, NetSuite and our CPQ Deal Hub. And it was a stretch. We had someone leave, and I said, hey, look, and that was always sitting over on the IT side, right? Usually you have someone that owns all your systems. And I made the pitch to my CFO, like, look, there's a lot of synergies that make sense of me being able to have and own that system and that development team and controlling their workload, and also the controls of who has access to those systems and what those accesses look like. I think every controller should be making that play. Especially NetSuite, your NetSuite, the developer should report into you, and you should control that system fully. It's your accounting source of truth. Deal Hub, bit more of a stretch there on the CPQ side, but since I also oversee sales comp, it made a lot of sense. But I think, yeah, all controllers should be making that request. And you probably have you have an engineer, right? That's probably a central resource, or maybe helping another team. You should be trying to get their time, but you have to come prepared with what you actually need them to do. And that is the hard part, is first doing the research to figure out what processes should I be targeting? What things could I improve? And then learning how to talk their language is another hurdle, but coming to them with wins, right? So for our automation program, hey, I'm going to spoon feed you some great processes that are going to have massive ROIs and are going to be big wins, right? That are easy. It's not going to be too much work, and it's going to show off the strength of the program that you're running. You can make that pitch, then you're going to be able to get prioritization.
Fantastic. We're going to move into rapid fire. And so these rapid fire questions, a sentence or two, kind of max. And I'll run through maybe like 10. We'll probably only use a few. If you don't like it, just go Eli next. Awesome. What is the most scenic place you've ever posted a journal entry?
I don't know if it's quite scenic, but a beach in Hawaii.
What's the most misleading metric in finance or accounting?
Ooh, that's such a good one. Let me think for a second on that one, because I really like that one. In general, it's revenue, right? Because at a startup company, especially, GAAP revenue is not actually usually what the health is, what's happening in the business. And so it can be very misleading at an executive level.
What is one dumb accounting rule that you would rewrite?
The entire lease, the new leasing pronouncement, the leases pronouncement is just silly.
Living in the Bay, what do you miss most about your home state of Texas?
There's literally nothing. No offense, Texas, but Bay Area for the win.
If you could automate any part of your daily life, what would it be?
Exercise, but still getting the benefits.
If you could shadow one non-finance role for a month to get better at your job, what would it be?
I would shadow a CRO. I think there's so much that finance and sales could collaborate on better.
Amazing. Well, this has been fantastic, Thomas. Appreciate your answering the barrage of questions. And know we kind of took it a bunch of different ways, but loved your stories and energy.
Yeah, it was awesome being here. I really appreciate it, Eli.
Thomas, where should people go to connect with you or follow your work?
I mean, I think it's a standard LinkedIn. I'm not too active. I don't post too much, but I always love meeting like-minded people and talking about ways we can progress finance, accounting, and automation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for coming on, and looking forward to having you on again at some point soon. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, Eli.
You've been listening to Incoming Statements, a production of Numeric. To learn how AI and automation are eliminating the manual burdens holding your accounting team back, visit numeric.io. Join us next time to hear from more top accounting voices on the challenges they're facing and where they see the industry heading.